We are in the midst of chapter 9 of Melachim Alef, and we are going to do a little cutting and pasting today, by which I mean we're going to read through the portion of the parak that we had not yet read inside, but then we're going to double back and see various other sections. I want to try to show you, maybe call a little bit of a methodological presentation about why things are sequenced as they are. And just bear in mind at the outset that sequencing is not always, in terms of how things are organized in a Sefer, we've seen this many times, it's not always a function of chronology from a historical perspective. Sometimes there are thematic considerations that overtake the sequencing in terms of chronology of how things unfolded. So if you have your Koren Tanakh, it's Melachim Alef, chapter 9. It's on page 417. Those who missed maybe last week or the last few weeks, let me just refresh your memory. We've been spending a lot of time on the description in Sefer Melachim Alef on not only the construction, but also the dedication of the Mikdash in Yerushalayim, of the temple in Jerusalem. Chapter 9, we read the first part of chapter 9 already last week. I'm just going to mute everybody unless it's time for questions, if you don't mind. It's a lot of distortion coming through on the wire. I do, of course, welcome questions and comments, but give me a running start before we get into that. Thanks so much. So we read last week the end of chapter 8 and the beginning of chapter 9. Again, because the numerical organization, 8, 9, 10, those numbers are not, religiously speaking, meaningful at all. They're just a frame of reference. So there's some kind of common system. Chapter 8, from verse 54 until the end of chapter 8, which you could say properly is verse 66. So 54 to 66 was sort of the denouement. It was after the aspirational prayer of, prayers are aspirational, but the programmatic prayer of Shlomo HaMelech at the dedication of the Mikdash. Then the denouement of what happened in terms of the offerings that were offered as part of this gathering of all the people in Yerushalayim, in the Chodesh Hashvi'i, in the 7th month. The biblical 7th month is, of course, Tishrei, what we call Tishrei, the Yerach HaEitanim. And the idea that we focused on of the overlap, the 7-day festival for the Mikdash and the 7-day festival in the month, known as the month of Chag, so named because the longest festival within it is Sukkot. And Chazal therefore pick up the name Chag based on the way the Torah phrases Chag HaSukkot in Parshat Emor, chapter 23 of the book of Vayikra. It calls it Chag LaHashem, not Chag HaMatzot and not Chag HaAtzeret, just Chag. So that's how Chazal picked up that Lashon, that language. So they refer to Sukkot that way. And therefore, the whole month sort of takes on that character. So that 7-day festival, we're trying to understand how did the chronology work. And of course, there are Deot Lakan Ulakan, but it sounds like, as far as Chazal are concerned, they somehow skipped Yom Kippur. It was very strange. How did they do that? We saw the Gemara Moed Katan like that. And then there's this connecting tissue pasuk, verse 1, chapter 9, verse 1, which if you look in a Masoretic text, again, so I really like the Koren Tanachim, generally it'll show you the paragraphing. That's the traditional paragraphing. There is a one-verse paragraph. One pasuk is the Parshiah. Vayihi kechalot Shlomo livnot et Beit Hashem, vet Beit HaMelech, vet kol cheshek Shlomo asher chafetz la'asot. And so it was when Shlomo completed the building of the house of Hashem and the palace of the king, the house of the king, and all that Shlomo desired, that he desired to do. And we learned that pasuk. We learned that pasuk now again. I'm highlighting it. We're going to see it a little more in depth in a moment. And then verses 2 through 9, which we read already last week, were psukim of the sort of the reaction by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the tefillah of Shlomo HaMelech, also probably to the whole ceremony of dedication, the Chanukat Habayit and Chanukat HaMizbeach, where Hashem comes to Shlomo HaMelech and tells him, the Navi tells us it is the second time. The first time was in Giv'on, before construction began, before, when it was just a concept. A Giv'on, a little bit north of Yerushalayim, where there was a massive bama, a high place, an altar, essentially, that was the central worship location prior to the building of the Mikdash. And then, now the bookend on the other side is, and now that everything was done, God came to Shlomo again. So just sort of stylistically, if you will, there's a the bookends on the outside of the whole structure are Hashem spoke to Shlomo before anything started, and Shlomo was heard from Hashem after everything was completed. And here we learned that it's, of course, conditional. We talked about that last time. A lot more to say on that, especially when we come to, we know what's coming, about to careen sort of off the cliff, unfortunately, in terms of Malchut, Beit David, and what's going to happen with the split. So the conditional statements are all there, Pasuk Bet through Tet, that Shlomo hears from Hashem. This is all amazing. Thank you. It's great, etc. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. But if things don't go well, ethically, morally, spiritually, so the place will be destroyed, and it will be terrible. And the people will ask, why is it? And the answer that they will give each other, the nations of the world, sort of trying to process how this could have happened, is that the Jewish people, Lo Aleinu, took on other gods, abandoned God, etc. So that's the unit. Now we're up to verse 10, Pasuk Yud. And Pasuk Yud picks up Pasuk Alef. So chapter 9, verse 1, and chapter 9, verse 10 seem to be parallel. Vayihi miktzei esrim shana shebana Shlomo et shnei habatim et Beit Hashem et Beit HaMelech. And we just had that in verse 1. So we should ask fairly, like, why is it essentially repeating it? Okay, but based on what I just explained, you can kind of understand the introduction in Giv'on when Hashem spoke to him back in chapter 3, verse 5. We learned that Hashem came to him, right? And if you look at chapter 3, verse 3, it's on page 406 in the Koran, the Hebrew English Koran Tanakh that I use. We learned Vayehav Shlomo et Hashem lalechet b'chukot David aviv rak b'bavot u'mezabeach u'maktir. Right, Shlomo loved God to follow in the edicts of his father David. Only he's still using high places. He's offering offerings in that place. 1,000 offerings. And verse 5, there's that interchange, and Shlomo asks then for his for wisdom and the like from Giv'on. So now that everything is built, the Beit Hashem is built, the Beit HaMelech and Kol Cheshek Shlomo, now Hashem comes to Shlomo, and again, now in Yerushalayim, that's now the bookends. And in fact, the Navi itself, in verse 2, back to chapter 9, verse 2, where we are, page 417 in Koran Tanakh that I'm using, right? Hashem, verse 2, Pasuk Bet, Hashem appeared to Shlomo a second time, as he had appeared in Giv'on. The Navi wants you to know it's connected. Okay? Unit. Now, if you look with me on the screen, just to consider something about the, I guess you could call it the chronology of what's transpiring, we'll see some interesting pieces today. And first time in a long time, we go back to seeing a map also inside. Let me close this and expand this. We're going to see the map shortly. We're not up to that yet. In verse 1, the Malbim writes, Vet kol cheshek, all the desire of Shlomo. Building a house for God and building a house for Hashem, and building a house for the king were necessary. But in addition to that, we're going to learn in chapter 9, he just wanted to do it. That was what he wanted to do. He sought to do it. It was volitional on his part. Livnot v'limtoa ulahagdil ma'asav af shelo letzorach hadvarim. Even though it was not entirely necessary or even necessary at all, he decided that's what he wanted to do, and he did. Rakadei sheyasem asim harbei k'mo shekatuv in Kohelet, according to Chazal, Kohelet, not only written by Shlomo HaMelech, doesn't use his name, calls him Kohelet ben David, but also that he wrote it in later life. And of course, the tone of it is wistful, nostalgic, maybe wizened by years of experience. It's Lahavdal Fe'avdot, Blake's song of experience, for all that Shir Hashirim is songs of innocence. So this is Shir, that's Shir Hashirim. Now we have Shir of Kohelet, Megillat Kohelet rather, a song of experience. But Rakshi Asamasim, and as he will reflect in Sefer Kohelet, Higdalti Ma'asai Baniti Li Batim. I kept going. I built things, and I made them, I made them what they had to be, made them great, etc., and so on and so forth. So we learned that here in this little section between the story of the Beit Hashem and the Beit HaMelech being built. And before we get into the details about Shlomo HaMelech's volitional constructions, which essentially is going to be much of the rest of chapter 9, sandwiched in is just to tell us this is sort of the connecting tissue. Everything till now was the necessary houses, house for Hashem, house for the king. Then comes the next thing that has to come here to sort of bookend it is Hashem speaking to Shlomo and telling him, look, it's all on condition that things work out in terms of behavior, in terms of morality, etc. Then it'll give us the details of the Cheshek Shlomo, that which he sought to build, which was beyond that which was necessary. And therefore, in verse 10, it comes back and tells us again that after 20 years of building these two houses, now we're going to come to a description of his relationship with Hiram, his relationship with Paro, to the north, to the south, and the like. Esrim Shana, verse 10, Esrim Terah, first of 20 years, Rashi tells us, Sheva Shanim lebeit Hashem ve'et beito, Shlosh Esrei Shana, Kmo she'amar lemala. That the Navi actually tells us that it took 20 years to build these areas, and now 20 years have elapsed of construction, and now we're going to go into like a new phase, essentially. The Mechilta, the Rashbi, the Mechilta, a Tanaitic work ascribed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, reflecting on the story of the Jewish people arriving at Har Sinai, and it telling us in the Torah that it was the third month of them leaving Egypt. The Jewish people ordered time based on Yetziat Mitzrayim. They didn't use a foreign calendar anymore. It wasn't based on whatever the chronology was from another ancient culture. They now had their own clock. So I only have months here. How do you know years? Because in the book of Bamidbar, it will begin with, right? So, et cetera, et cetera. It's in the second year. So that tells us that it was related again to Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? And so on and so forth. It keeps describing different elements, but then we learn, of course, that even after they came into the land of Israel, they still were counting according to Yetziat Mitzrayim. How do we know? In our book, Melachim Alef, in chapter 6, it actually says that it was 480 years from the time the Jewish people left Egypt, which tells us that they kept to what you could call an Exodus clock. All right. So once the Beit HaMikdash was built, so now they started counting according to the years of kings and according to the building of those houses, namely the houses of the years of the kings, rather, and the building of the houses, meaning these two palaces, one for Hashem, one for Shlomo. Shnemar vayhi miketas shana shebana Shlomo et shnei habatim, right? And then it says later on in Book of Melachim 2 and in Yeshaya, it will tell us it's the 14th year of Chizkiyahu. Lo zachu limnot lebinyano umanu lechurbano shenema be25 shana legalutenu. By the end already of by Rishon, when the Jewish people are already in exile, we already find that when the Jewish people are not meritorious, the count goes according to the Churban. Those who are generally with us on Tisha B'Av each year, past, hopefully there won't be one this year, you know that I announce each year how many years have elapsed the minhag to announce how many years have elapsed since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And it's 1949, 1,949 years. So each year, like we announce how many years it's been since the Churban of Bayit Sheni. That's based on this Mechilta. It's the Minhag Yisrael. If you open up the Tanakh now, just let's see it inside. Sort of, I'm trying to put things together sequentially. Look at chapter 6 in Melachim Aleph, and you see that pasuk right in there, 409, verse 6. 409, chapter 6, verse 1. Perak Vav, pasuk Al. Vahi b'shmonim shana, v'arba meot shana, letzei b'nei Yisrael mitzam b'shana haravi'it b'chodesh Ziv, hu hachodesh hasheni limloch Shlomo al Yisrael vayiven habayit la'Hashem. So 480 years after the after Yetziat Mitzrayim. It was the 4th year of the reign of Shlomo, and he broke ground in the 2nd month of his 4th year. 2nd month is Chodesh Ziv. We'd call it Iyar. We talked already about previously. It's Iyar or it's Nisan, depending on the lunar calendar, the solar calendar. But that's when he started. All right. And then we learn about the buildings. Chapter 6 is about building the buildings. Yeah. And indeed, that's what we see. Chapter 6, verses 2 through 10. Right. We have it onto the bottom of the page. And then we have, as the building is going, Hashem gives him the word that if you follow what I do, v'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. Right. By the by, it does not mention the prospect of destruction. The specter of destruction does not come up here. But if you build it and you follow the right way to build it, I'll dwell in the midst of the Jewish people, and I will not abandon my people. Verse 14, he builds the house and he finishes it. Then we learn about the both the walls and the furnishings, and particularly among the furnishings, I draw your attention to the kruvim, the massive kruvim that are built on the floor. Talked about that floor versus the portable ones that are already atop the portable Aron HaKodesh that we just read about in last week's Parshat HaShavua. And those kruvim are built, they're standing, and we have a whole section here which culminates in chapter 6, verse 38, or 37, actually, you do 37, 38. Bashana, we learn after the whole building is completed, the structure of it, Bashana Revi'it Yusad Beit Hashem B'Yerach Ziv. In the 4th year was the cornerstone laid, the foundation laid in the month of Ziv. Again, ER, Nisan, something like that. Verse 38, Pasuk Lamed Chet, Uvishana ha'chatesre b'Yerach Bul, in the 11th year. So 7 years have elapsed, and now it's Yerach Bul, Hu HaChodesh HaShmini, in the 8th month, right? So 7 years later, in the 8th month, he finished building the house. It tells us it was 7 years to build. You with me? So if you do the math, so he started in year 4, he completed the building in, it says, year 11 of his reign. Okay? Are you with me? Shelley, give me 3 more minutes. I got to finish this thought. I got to build it.
I know what your thought is.
What?
Your thought is that it's going to take a lot more time to build the palace than it took to build the Beit HaMikdash.
Exactly. That's where I'm coming to. Thank you. That's exactly it. When you look at chapter 7, verse 1, again, if you're looking in a Tanakh, not just random psukim that you find somewhere, but a Tanakh, where the pagination and the paragraphing is there, it's not a paragraph break. It just goes chapter 7. Why? The people who decided to make numbers threw in, oh, it's chapter 7. Why? New subjects about his palace. I want to argue very clearly, not a new subject. Chapter 7, verse 1 is the very next pasuk. So it should be read like this. Verse 37, Bashana Revi'it Yusad Beit Hashem B'Yerach Ziv. Then, Uvashana Achatesre B'Yerach Bul HaChodesh HaShmini Kala Abayit L'chol Dvar V'chol Mishpatav Vayivneu Sheva Shanim Ve'et Beito Bana Shlomo 13 Shana Vayichal Et Kol Beito. Then Shlomo built his house for 13 years, and he completed his house. And chapter 7, verses 2 through 12 is in a description of the construction of the palace of the king. Not the Melech Malchem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the Melech Yisrael Shlomo HaMelech. And it's a continuity from the Beit Hashem to the Beit HaMelech. How long did that take him? 7 years. 7 years did he build it. Now, now there's a whole description. We skipped it when we originally learned because I wanted to focus as just exclusively on the building of the Beit HaMikdash, and because I couldn't get into the whole mechanics, we'd have to be flipping around too much ahead. So now we've sort of seen it. We skipped a little piece. Now we're going back to see the house that Shlomo built for the king. And it's called the house that is the forest of Lebanon. Why? Because it was built out of cedars of Lebanon. And its structure, unlike the Beit Hashem, which has a lot of wood in it, but is overlaid with gold, we find that here the house is very much about the wood. not the throne. The throne is not mentioned here. It'll be mentioned later. That's not our parak now, but the building. So verse 2, Vayiven et Beit Yar Lebanon, 100 ama orko, v'chamisha ma rochbo, u'shoshim ama komato, al arba'a turei amudei arazim, u'chrutot arazim ala amudim. There are pillars. You get the dimensions, 100 by 50 by 30. In terms of cubits, we have the construction of it. We have that it's has so many pillars, right? V'safun ba'erez. The whole thing has beams and pillars, right? Mimal alat slaot shel amudim 45 15 tur ushkufim 3 turim. We have windows, rows of windows. El mechzeh shalosh pamim. So sort of like it's going in rows, one over the other. Again, describing the various doorways and how everything is aligned and symmetrical and very ornate. It's hard for me to even picture this. It's some kind of a hallway, a hall that's built with pillars, again, 50 amot long, 30 amot wide, and then there's another area in front of them, and pillars, they're very thick, that are all there. So again, overlaid everything, covered with cedar, wall to wall, top to bottom. This is a marvel. What's not mentioned is how the throne itself looks. Now, why not? Bear with me, not for today. But it mentions this is the throne room, and in the throne room will people come where you will adjudicate cases. And it throws in for us that in this house where he was living, in the other area, there's another place sort of seems within. And he also made the house, by the way, in addition to his own inner chambers, there's a house for the daughter of Paro. There goes daughter of Paro again. What's she doing there? Asher lakach Shlomo ka'olam hazeh, which Shlomo, the one that Shlomo had taken, that is just like that hall that had been built. So kol eila avanim yikarot, kimidot gazit migorarot b'mamgeira, mibayit umichutz, mimasad al tfachot umichutz erech hatzera gdola. The whole thing filled with very ornate stonework, right? Everything cut, everything built inside, outside, everything very, very fancy, but built out of wood and stone. Now, I don't know if these are precious gems of avanim yikarot or if they're just expensive types of stone and the like. Not clear, but they're very large stones. Avnei 10 amot, avnei 8 amot, right? They're 10 amot, they're 8 amot, very large. Avanim yikarot, kimidot gazit va'arez. And above them, there are other stones that are hewn stones and made of pieces made of cedar. You have 3 rings around, a great courtyard. So describing, that there were also courtyard areas, a parallel between the Beit HaMelech and the Beit Hashem. Okay, now bear with me one more minute, and then I see Debbie, your hands up. I see Shelly, your hands up as well. I don't know if it's again or the same, but the point here is that when we learn the story about the building of the Beit HaMikdash, we're told that building the Beit HaMikdash and its process was also bound up with the building of the house for the Melech. So the way this is organized, I think, is to tell us a few things. Number one, and this I saw in a note, I was home over Shabbat learning Baruch Hashem. So Rav Meidan has essays, of course, on the Parsha and his Sefer Ki Karov Elecha, not yet translated into English. Amazing. So there's a footnote in the one on the Kruvim where he points out, and it hadn't struck me before, the massive Kruvim that Shlomo built took him 7 years to build the Beit HaMikdash, then 13 years to build the house that was the house for the king. So 20 years have elapsed. And now look at chapter 9, verse 10, where it actually says 20 years passed, right? For 13 years, the 13 years while he's building the palace, the ceremony of bringing in the Aron Kodesh and of welcoming everyone to Yerushalayim had not happened yet. Or to say it differently, for 13 years after he finished building the Beit HaMikdash, it would seem that they would still be giving korbanot mostly up in Givon while his own construction was happening. And during those 13 years, the Aron Kodesh with the luchot of Moshe Rabbeinu and them, and I obsessively pointed this out to my son, Zohar Gesund, when we were driving up to Yerushalayim. We passed the sign on Kvish Echad for Kiryat Yarim. I said, "Where is Kiryat Yarim?" He said, "It's wherever that sign is." I said, "No, in the Tanakh." So where is it? It's in Sefer Shmuel. It's where the Aron Brit Hashem was being stored, and that's where they brought it up. From there, did they take Kvish Echad? I don't know. I'm making a joke. Obviously, it's anachronistic, but I mean it sort of. Maybe it's correct because Kvish Echad is built where it is because topographically that's the best place to build a road. Was there an ancient road there? I just don't know. But Kiryat Yarim to Yerushalayim, it's in that vicinity. They brought the Aron Kodesh up and into Yerushalayim. Who did that? Well, it was brought up from Kiryat Yarim by David HaMelech, but when they brought it up, they didn't actually put it into the Beit HaMikdash in David's day. There was no Beit HaMikdash. Remember? They have it in a little tent. It doesn't actually have the moment of inauguration until Shlomo invites everybody to Yerushalayim. When does he do that, it seems, based on how things are organized? In year 20 of the building process. Or to say it differently, in year 4 of his reign, he starts his building projects. He completes them in year 24 of his reign. And it seems, based on what we're reading here of the way the sequence goes, for some reason, we're meant to understand that Shlomo feels that the building a house for Hashem and the building of his house need to be intertwined. And I see this because of the way that it goes in chapter 9, verses 1 through 9, right? In our parak tet, pasuk Alef through tet, is that this wasn't criticism by Hashem, but Hashem saying, good, this is good. It was correct to build both the house for me and the house for you, which is really a house for Hashem as well, since it's the Malchut Beit David having a palace, right? If you look in Rashi, he doesn't go down this road exactly. Right, Rashi had said, right, it's 7 years to the Beit Hashem and then 13 years. But, it doesn't go as far as saying, by the way, when was this jamboree when everybody got together, right? But if you look carefully and you could just figure this out. If he finished building, here's like a little proof to it. If he started building in year 4, and it says he finished in year 11 in the eighth month, that's after Tishrei. Tishrei is Yerach 18, the 7th month. It actually says that if you look in chapter 8, verse 2, page 413, when he gathered everybody for the big celebration, etc., what month is it? It's Chodesh Tishrei. So it can't be that he finished in Chodesh Mar Cheshvan and he went back to Tishrei unless it was the next year, or maybe it wasn't the next year. Maybe it was actually a number of years later, lots of years later, year 24 of his reign. Why? Because now he could show everybody his house and the house for Hashem and cement it as that center. And that would also explain why it is that as you read through it, the first thing that Shlomo HaMelech is interested in his tefillah to Hashem. The first thing before the actual tefillah is he mentions, if you look in chapter 8, verse where are we? Verse 17, verse 18. It's about building a house for Hashem, right? And I built the house. Verse 20. Shlomo says, I arose in the place of my father David. I sat on the throne of Israel, as Hashem said to me, Va'ivneh habayit l'shem Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Where is he sitting on a throne if he didn't build the throne room yet? He built the throne room because he built a house. He built a place because the description here is it's the cementing of the fact that not only the building of the Beit Hashem is religiously significant, but the building of the Beit HaMelech is significant because it's building the Malchut Beit David. Vasim sham aron makom la'aron asher sham brit Hashem. I placed there in the temple. I placed a place for the Aron where there is for the covenant of Hashem. Right? Why is he telling them that? Because he hasn't brought it in yet. Why not? Because all these years during the building of Beit Hashem, or the Beit HaMelech, He hasn't brought it in yet. That's what's going on here. Okay, that's a mouthful. We'll take Debbie, Shelley, Karen. Okay, Debbie, go ahead. Unmute to speak. Okay.
So having taken a class in this previously before the pandemic, that I'm a big picture thinker, but the teacher, who's wonderful, brought tons of pictures showing the building of the temple and the palace. Well, I was so taken by all of that detail, even though I approached it with my negative, I only want the big picture view. And in the end, I think all of this is important because it shows how far Shlomo's palace, as well as the temple, because it shows how far the people had come from when they started. And I think that was Hashem's plan. And somehow Shlomo, as wise as he was, picked this up. It's just like on Tisha B'Av we mourn, but thank God we have a country that's only 73 years old, where now a 2-bedroom condo in Jerusalem could cost $1 million.
Out of reach.
I think that's a wonderful thing in the same way.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's excellent.
That's why
I actually have a book that has these pictures.
Was just as important.
Right. Listen, I should try to maybe a future installment. We get to the throne. I'll show you the artist's rendering of that, and we'll go back and see all the different pictures. But yeah, tremendous amount of detail, and of course, these are all reconstructions. No one has a photograph, obviously. We have the descriptions, and can artist rendering best guess about what it actually looked like. So, point well taken. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you, Shelley. Over to you.
Okay. My question is that if he's building a house for Bat Paro that's just with the same wood that he used in his palace, and some of this wood is also going to be used was also used in the temple, the cedar wood. I know underneath the gold. Okay.
Remember, he got, and they ate shemen, and there was different wood, but remember, he gets the wood and he puts it in. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a continuation from the Beit Hamikdash to the palace of David, to the palace of Shlomo, to the palace of Bat Paro. It sounds like Bat Paro is his primary wife, which is very problematic. If she is, do any of the commentators say she's not the mother of the next king? No. Next king is going to be Rehoboam, and his mother is listed as Naama. Mm-hmm. Okay, did she not have any children with Shlomo? We know that the whole dynasty is going to get into trouble because he doesn't seem to educate his son properly. And
we'll get there. You're 10 steps ahead of all of us, Shelley. Amazing. Thank you. We have to get there. You're asking the right questions. Why is Bat Paro being mentioned and singled out? Is she somehow the primary wife, or is there something else at play, which is exactly what we're going to read now in chapter 9 to frame that a little more. We're going to talk about Bat Paro this week, and we're going to come back to her again because she's part of the fly in the ointment, if you will, already being prefigured from previously. Let's see the psukim inside to appreciate the significance of Bat Paro. Let's think about it for today, at least, less so about the marriage and the offspring potentially and the influence, and more about the symbolism of what it means that Bat Paro has an embassy. Paro has an embassy right next to the place of Malchut Yisrael. Let's explore that today. You follow what I'm saying? We have to get back to these other questions, but you're on to something very important. Helen, I have to ask you to hold 1 minute because Karen is before you in the queue, but I'm happy to listen to you right after. Shelley, so thanks for that. Let's move over to Karen.
I don't want to take away from your time, Rabbi, but
not taking away. This is the contributions that make the class a class and not a recording.
Okay. We spend an awful lot of time about How long did it take to build it? Did he build things in the right order? Where the materials come from?
Yep.
I know because I've been working my way through Ein Yaakov. So I saw the part yesterday about Shlomo, and the Talmud does not take Shlomo to task for anything having to do with building the Beit HaMikdash.
No.
The only thing they take him to task is that he let his wives do avodah zara.
We're getting there. You're also three chapters ahead of me.
Exactly. So I'm saying all the criticisms and questions about what order these things in, at least our maforshim,
they're not criticizing him either, right?
They're not criticizing. They're moving on to other things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, thank you for that point. And just to heighten that, the point is, my point was just to say, you might have thought, well, what's going on here? The king is building a house for Hashem. That's amazing. It's beautiful. He built a shul, but now you're throwing in a monkey wrench that somehow he's also involved in building his own house. Is it about Hashem or is it about him? And the point of the way the Navi structures this, the way the Sefer is constructed, is Dafka to say that the building of the Beit HaMelech was not a sideshow or a distraction or a lack of connection to Hashem. Au contraire, it was intrinsically related to the story, the building of Beit Hashem and building the Beit HaMelech. The two are wedded to each other. He didn't just build a shul, but the house that he built for himself was not truly for himself. It was a house that was deeply symbolic of the relationship of Hashem to Malchut Beit David, and especially, of course, therefore, by extension, to Bnei Yisrael, the Klal Yisrael. And by the by, Chazal do actually praise Shlomo, if you want to know, I forgot already where the citation is, that 7 years to build a mikdash. He didn't stop. He kept going. When he came to his own building, it took a little bit longer. It's okay. It's fine. He took his time. It took longer, 13 years. Yes. No. Who am I to criticize Chazal? Chalila. That's what they say. So beautiful. But, Rav Meidan just has this footnote where he makes the point that many years elapsed after the mikdash was built as a structure, had these kruvim in the Kodesh HaKodashim, and the Aron Brit Hashem doesn't come until the day of inauguration, which could have been actually many years later. Why would Shlomo wait? Because he wants the people, when they come to Yerushalayim, to see in chapter 8, they're going to see when he gathers all of the people, they're actually going to find the Beit HaMelech and the Beit Hashem next to each other. These two are connected to each other. Helen, you're next, and then Larry. Helen, go ahead.
Okay, I got three things. First of all, I must set a premise. Who is the author of Ein Mukdam? And can you give me the whole pasuk? Because we're bumping into chronology all the time, and I don't know who the author of Ein Mukdam is. And so
you mean as a statement?
As a statement, yes.
Oh, so it's one of the I would call it hermeneutic principles, right? One of the principles of interpretation in the Tanakh that we have from Chazal. Chazal have this as a general principle. Ein mukdam u'char b'Torah. Specifically, where is it?
No shame omro. There's no
shame omro. Rav Manasseh bar Tachlifa said it in the name of Rav.
Okay.
That's the Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Amarava, Amarav Sechora, Amarav Huna, Kolmakim Shanu Chamim Derech Minyan, Ein Ukdam Muchar. You have it. Those are two examples. You have the Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah, the Yerushalmi in Shkalim, and so on and so forth. The list goes on and on. You have the Mechilta, the Rabbi Yishmael says it also in the Masechta Deshira, in Parshat B'Shalach. And so on and so forth. The Mechilta, the Rashbi, the Sifri, many halachic works, not only Agadic works, but halachic works quote this as a principle.
Okay,
that was your first point. Step. Okay, second?
Yeah, the second one, you mentioned the word adjudicate. Several months ago, we discussed mishpatim. Now, some neighbor ox has gored my ox 3 times.
Right.
I got to get to the basin or to the Hamolech to discuss this issue of damages. So I'm not thinking of his palace as being vain. I'm thinking of everybody's knocking on the door, just like you had a discussion about the basing with Rabbi Reese recently.
Right, right.
People need to be adjudicated.
Fine.
And then I got one other thing. In the Parsha, the Mishkan comes before Chet HaEgel.
Yes.
Now, just because we're spending all this time on the glory and the grandeur of the Beis HaMikdash, let the buyer beware that a Chet HaEgel thing could very well occur
Again.
after all this grandiosity.
Yeah, right. And some variation of it might have actually been transpiring, as was alluded to already a few times this morning. Again, not our parak now. We'll get there about Shlomo Melech with the wives,
Okay,
what's
wait.
going on, right?
One more thing.
Okay,
what happened
number
to
4.
Shiloh? Shiloh, you're with your son at this road juncture. Where was the transition from Shiloh then?
No. Okay. I can't go back there, Helen. It's too long ago.
Okay.
Shiloh is in the book of Shoftim at the beginning of the book of Shmuel. Remember, the Mishkan's in Shiloh, but the Plishtim come and take away the Aron Kodesh, and then the Jewish people
Right.
get it back, and then it lives in several places, and then finally it gets moved. And when it's moved, they try to take it out of that place, and then there's a disaster because people die. Remember the 2 parrots, Uzzah,
Right.
the 2 people reach their hand out. So then it ends up in a place in Kiryat Yarim, in the Beit Oved Edom Hagiti, and there it stays to the end of the book of Shmuel. And then in the book of Melachim Alef, in the book of Shmuel, finally David HaMelech, after he conquers Yerushalayim, moves it to Yerushalayim, but it's in an ohel of some sort in Yerushalayim, in the vicinity of Ir David, or maybe on the Harabait, whatever it is. It's not yet actually, can't be on Har Moriah, because only buys it at the end in chapter 24, whatever it is, the end of Shlomo Bet. And in Sefer Melachim Aleph, the Beit HaMikdash is built, and Shlomo Melech moves the Aron Kodesh into the newly built Beit HaMikdash. My point was just to say, newly built doesn't mean 5 minutes ago. It might have been 13 years later. Might have been that many years later, after he built the Beit Hashem and after he built the Beit HaMelech. That's when he gathered all the people. That's when he had his prayer. That's when he cemented it all. That's when Hashem came to him a second time, just like he had in Giv'on before anything was built. And he told him, Shlomo, I got to tell you something. This is all terrific, but if things don't work out, this house will not stand, right? And then we learn, okay, now we're going to get to the next section, chapter 9, where we're up to the next section of the parak. Let me move to the next person, if that's okay. Larry, go ahead, please. And then Shoshi. Larry, go ahead, please.
I put it in the chat.
I didn't see.
Okay, no problem. I was just wondering, where was Shlomo operating from during the 20 or 24 years? And B, but he had to have been sitting on a chair of some kind, and wherever he sits, that's the throne.
At that time, yes. Min hastam, it's whatever David left him, because don't forget, David builds the Ir David, right? Now, Ad Hayom Hazeh, we are not clear on where this palace was exactly located. We're just not. Now, why not? Just not. We don't 100% know. Is it over the palace of David in Ir David? Is it somewhere in the vicinity? We're going to see a little geography today. We're about to do that. We won't see the topographical part, but we're going to see a place called the Milo. Where is that? So there's a big discussion. Also, it's not proof positive one way or the other, but the fact that there's so much wood in this structure and relatively speaking less stonework might imply that it was harder to preserve once it was burned. The Beit HaMelech gets burned finally in the time of the Churban Bayit Rishon, right? So it's not clear. Where was he before? We just have no real data.
Are there any negative criticism of the fact that more time and expense was incurred in building the palace compared to the Beit HaMikdash?
Chazal turn it exactly in a positive vein and say, look at that. With great zeal did he build a Beit HaMikdash for 7 years without stopping, and it was more ornate than the house itself, than the Beit HaMelech for sure, because there's much more gold in it. You don't hear in the description of the house of the king about overlaying everything with gold. You don't hear about the bronze work and the silver. That's all in the Beit HaMikdash. that's an important contrast, right? They call it Beit Yar HaLevanon. It's the house of the forest of Lebanon. They called it that because it looked like a forest. We looked at it because it was all made of cedar wood. By the by, we also have the reality that this house that he builds is itself taking 13 years, not because he put more detail into it, again, according to Chazal, because he was less focused on it. If he did that, so then, according to that logic, you have to say, basically, if that's true, then maybe not like I'm saying, but rather that the jamboree, the gathering in Yerushalayim to dedicate the Beit HaMikdash, happened in year 8 of the construction, 7 years of construction in year 8. It can't be in year 7, because it says the building was finished in the month of Mar Cheshvan, the 8th month, because Year Achbul, the 8th month of year 11 of his reign. He started in year 4, he completed in year 11. We saw that inside chapter 6, verse 38. If that's true, he can't gather the people a month before he finished. So he finished. So it's either the next year or it's all those years. I'm suggesting, based on the pshat, it's all those years later. And I think there's a hint to it. Medan gives us that he built the whole, and why did it take longer? Kacha, it took longer. We're going to see now parts about Hiram. We'll see if we get there yet today. But like that. Okay, Shoshi, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a little slower on all of this.
Okay.
So through all this conversation, it hit me. So he builds Beis Hashem, or Hashem says, hey, I'm giving you this bracha to build a beautiful Beis Hashem, and I'm going to be Shachanti B'tocham. And then he builds it, and then he builds his own with the quarter for Bat Paro. And then Hashem says, uh-oh, that Bat Paro little few words.
Not about Bat Paro.
No?
Nope. At this point, it is not, there is no hint yet of a criticism involving Bat Paro.
Well, it's amazing. Not of Bat Paro, but he says, Azvu es Hashem Elohekechem, Asher hotzi es Avosam, blah, blah, blah. If you go to Elokim Acherim.
I see it.
All that. Why all of a sudden here is it saying that?
Let's finish the rest of chapter 9 and it's going to become apparent. But it is not, I'm arguing, it's a great point, but I'm arguing this is not yet a criticism of the Bat Paro story. It will be later on because of what's going to happen, but it's not right now. As we'll see in the rest of chapter 9, we got to get to the rest of the Sukkim. Shelley has her hand up again, so I don't want to ignore that. So Shelley, go ahead. And then after Shelley, if you don't mind, we'll pull up stakes and read the rest of the parak so we get a flavor of what's going on and see a map. Okay, go, Shelley.
He's not being criticized yet for Bat Paro or how long it took to build his palace or anything like that. Could it be because he's doing this for the motivation of, in a way, he thinks he's going to be bringing on the Messianic age. And therefore, God thinks maybe he's going to be building on the Messianic age, and it's okay to build on the Messianic age.
Okay,
and only when it falls apart that is that bad.
Good, excellent, wonderful. To that end, exactly to that end, turn to page 417 in the Koren Tanakh, and let's understand what's flying over here. Because the rest of the parak, starting in verse 10, Pasuk Yud, to the end of the parak, which we're going to finish today, let's say, I would entitle I called the name of the shir, International Trade by Land and Sea. It's a retrospective of all of the ways that Shlomo HaMelech was in the middle, geographically, and in the middle, geopolitically, of that which was going to be unfolding in his relations with other nations nearby, and that these are very significant. And in the first case, it's actually seems to be more of a review of things we already knew, because when he was building the Mikdash, he needed Hiram Melech Tzor, the king of Tyre, not the king of Tyre of the port city Tyre, but back in the day, the city of Tyre that was a city-state that was a little bit of an island. Ayin Sham, the history, it was actually built up to connect, to make a land bridge between the land and this jutting out section that apparently was an island kingdom, perfect borders all around, led by this Hiram Melech Tzor. So let's just see this inside. So I'll read it as a unit. By Shana, Asher bana Shlomo et Shnei abatim, et Beit Hashem et Beit HaMelech. Hiram Melech Tzor Nisai et Shlomo, Ba'atzei Arazim, Uva'atzei V'roshim, Uvazahav L'chol Cheptzo, Az Tina Melech Shlomo L'Hiram Estrim Ir Be'eretz HaGalil. We're just reading it through. There's a lot of strangeness. We'll dial back and understand it more in depth in a moment. After the 20 years of the building phase, and during that building phase, it must be, because we already learned previously about Hiram Melech Tzor. He's already in chapter, whatever it is, chapter 5. He already shows up, right? He's already in he's already in chapter 5, verse 15, right? It's already bound up there. So this is a retrospective. It's not happening now. It had happened over time, but it's reminding us about this. He's also in chapter, whatever it was, chapter 7, verse 13, that he took a guy from Hiram and brought him and his people to build and help construct things, right? So all of that has already happened. It's reminding us, right? So Hiram al-Tzor Nisa, it had happened already, right? He had already assisted. He already raised him up with the cedar wood, with the cypress wood, with the gold, according to all of his desire. Then Shlomo, according to what it says here, the pshat is he gave Hiram 20 cities in the Galil. Vayetze Hiram at Mitzor lirot et ha'arim asher natan lo Shlomo v'lo yashru beinav. And he went Hiram, from Sor, came to see these cities. He didn't like them. Vayomer me'arim ha'eleh asher natata li achi. Right? My brother, what did you do to me? Why did you give me these cities? Vayikra lem eretz kavul adem hazeh. It's called the land of Kavul until today. Until today means until the time of the writing of the Sefer. Then we learn. Vayishlach Hiram lamelech mea ve'esrim kikar zahav. He sent the king 120 talents of gold. Vayezed dvar hamas asher he'elah hamelech Shlomo livnot et Beit Hashem ve'et beito ve'et milo ve'et chomat Yerushalayim ve'et chatzor ve'et Megiddo ve'et gazer. Right? So this is the tribute, means the tribute here, the tax, means the raising up, not of money, but of people. That Shlomo raised up in order to build the house of Hashem and to build his house and to build this mysterious place called the Milo and to build the wall of Yerushalayim and Chatzor and Megiddo and Gazer. Where are all these places? What are all of these places? Where did they come from? What's their relationship to Shlomo? Look with me on a map. We got to see it in the map, and then it makes it clear. Okay, there's Tzor on the top. Here's the Kinneret, Yam Kinneret, obviously. Over here, that's obviously the ocean. Haifa. This time, by the way, just for kicks, I turned on the filter so you could see like today's cities in gray. So that's where Kiryat Shmona is, right? This is Katzrin. This is the Golan. This is this is Metula up here. There's Tzor. The part over here that you don't see jutting out was at one time not entirely connected. It was like some kind of an island. A whole story there. Nariya Akko, just a little bit to the east of Akko, we have the Eretz Kabul. This is the area we think where it happened. All right, we think this is the area that's being mentioned. All right, this is where we have that Chatzor was being built. Chatzor, Kabul gave it over to the other fellow to Hiram. Here's Megiddo down here. Zichron Yaakov, if you know anyone there, or Caesarea. Here's Megiddo. Beit Sha'an across here. Jenin, Afula. That's all in this area. Krav Megiddo will happen there. We know the biblical place is there for sure. And then we have the mention of this place down here called Gezer. Gezer. This is Ashdod already over here. Tel Aviv Yafo over here. Netanya, yeah. Gezer. Okay, you with me? Gezer. Now, if you look at verse 15, we have a bunch of these places just mentioned. Chatzor, Megiddo, and Gazer. 3 cities. Now, why these cities? This is strategically a very important place. This is strategically an important place because of the pass here coming down. This is strategic because this is the lowlands, and you see topographically, this is already the mountain range. Right? And down here, Gazer seems to be farther south. Here's Yericho. You can't see Yerushalayim. It's down here, but it's all in the same vicinity. Are you with me? Here we are. Look at verse 16. Paro melech Mitzrayim, Allah. Vayilkod et Gezer. Vayisrafah ba'esh. V'et ha'kna'ani hayoshev ba'ir harag. Vayitnah shiluchim levito eshet Shlomo. The king of Egypt, Paro, conquered this place. He killed off he burnt it. He destroyed all of the Canaanim who were there. And he gave it as a wedding gift for his daughter, the wife of Shlomo. And then, Vayiven Shlomo et Gazer, Ved Beit Choron Tachton. Beit Choron Tachton is just over, we think, around here, just south of the area of Ramallah. See it? Down here, Beit Choron Tachton. I don't even know what this is, but I'm pretty sure it's this is the same place, right here. So he had that built. Verse 18, Ved Baalat, Ved Tadmor, Bamidbar Baaretz. Baalat is here, Tadmor is way down, it's off the map. He built these things. Verse 19, Ved Kol Arei HaMiskenot, Asher Hayu Shlomo, all of the cities that are storehouses, basically. Ved Arei HaRechev, Ved Arei HaParashim, all of the places to store chariots and all that had to do with the riders. Veit Cheshek Shlomo Asher Chashak Livnot Yerushalayim uva Lebanon, all that Shlomo desired to build in Yerushalayim and in the Lebanon, Uvechol Eretz Memshalto, and all the place where he ruled. Kol ha'am hanotar min ha'emori achiti aprizi achivi vayivusia asher lo mibnei Yisrael hema, all the people who are left over, the nations of the 7 nations who had not been killed, who had not been taken out. All of those people who are not Jewish, who are living where? In the land of Israel. B'neihem asher notru achareihem ba'aretz, asher lo yachlu b'nei Yisrael lahacharimam, the Jewish people could not destroy them. Why not? Vayaleim Shlomo lamas oved ad yom hazeh. Shlomo HaMelech made them the working class. They were the laborers. U'b'nei Yisrael lo natan Shlomo aved. The Jewish people did not work in the tasks of being civil servants, of being in the menial labor, being construction workers. Why? Because they're going to Tzahal. They're going to fight when need be. Follow? All of this description is a description of the various cities that Shlomo built. How did he get Gazer that he built? Why did he raise the tribute? Why did it mention in verse 14 that he had the tribute of these people? 15 of the people that he raised up. Telling you, here are the people that he raised to build various cities. Oh, by the way, now I mentioned Gazer. How did he get Gazer? How did he get that place? Oh, the king of Egypt conquered it for him and gave it to him as a gift. Then he built it. You follow? So when you start getting a picture, and it's not the picture that we imagined, right? I don't know about you. I always imagined once David HaMelech conquered what he conquered, once everything was done and taken care of, so they put up a little fence and they plowed it through so no one could make tracks. They put up a barbed wire fence and they had a border. Velochein. Or I imagined when it said the 7 nations that had to be, removed, be offered. If you want to make peace, you could leave. If you want to stay, you have to give tribute. Otherwise, they're going to be killed off. It's a fight to the end. Asher lo yachlu, they were not able to remove them. You get a much more complicated composite picture. By the by, that's not the end. Verse 23. So he has 550 commanders, basically, chieftains, that's the wrong word, civil servants, who are the people in charge. They're the lieutenants of Shlomo HaMelech. There are 550 of them. Harodim ba'am means they, literally means to subjugate. Pru'ervu milu ha'aretz v'chivshua uredu vidgat hayam, etc. Uredu means lirdotbo is to, they're running things, right? Those people are going to do the work. Verse 24. Ach bat paro alta meir David el beita. That's a hint, Larry, to what you were asking before. It sounds like she was in Ir David because they all lived in Ir David till they built a palace. And she went from Ir David el beita asher banala. Asher bana et hamilo, that place that Shlomo HaMelech had built called the Milo. We'll see that in a minute in one of the Mefarshim. Ve'ala Shlomo shalosh pamim b'shana olotu shlomim al mizbeach asher bana la'Hashem v'akterito. 3 times a year did he do the shalosh regalim. He offered these offerings. Of course, the Beit Mikdash running all the time, but the king brought his offerings those times. V'akterito asher lifnei Hashem shilam et habayit. He completed the house. All right, that was the completion. Verse 26. Va'oni asa, with an Alef, Va'oni asa HaMelech Shlomo be'etzion gaver, asher et elot al sfat Yam Suf be'eretz Edom, We think, we're not 100% sure, Etzion Gaver and Elot, today called Eilat, at the Red Sea. That's where they were having trade. So it was in Yamsu, Al Sfat Yamsuf, Be'eretz Edom, at the Red Sea, what we call the Red Sea, the Yamsuf, the Reed Sea is the Red Sea. Vayishlach Hiram ba'oni et avadav, anshe oniyot yodei hayam, im avdei Shlomo. Hiram sent in these ships his own servants, because his people were also mariners and they knew how to work the sea. So he took them from Tsor up north, transported them down south, and they were using that as a port area. Vayavo Ophira, vayikchu misham zahav arba me'ot ve'esrim kikar, vayaviu al melech Shlomo, and they went to this faraway place in Africa, and they were bringing from there 420 talents of gold. Okay, now we're not going to read further today because we're out of time. But next time we're going to see inside, well, next time, some part of next time, we're going to see chapter 10 is the queen of Sheba, Malkat Sheva, is going to show up from Africa and have her dialogue with Shlomo HaMelech. But the mystery that we have to solve for the remaining few minutes here, the Ralbag, the great rationalist himself, says, how could it be that Shlomo gave Hiram 20 cities in the Galil? I mean, it says in Divrei Hayamim, in that version, that Hiram gave them to David. And that was really the language here says that the king Shlomo gave to Hiram. Somehow I can't mean that. If you look it up in Divrei Hayamim, we don't have time right now, but there it says that Hiram gave the cities to Shlomo. So it must be that Sarseu Parsheu, that really you have to read it in some scrambled way. This verse doesn't mean Shlomo gave it to Siddur Ralbag. Can't mean that Shlomo gave it to Hiram. Impossible. But it must be that really Hiram gave it to Shlomo, which is fascinating because the Ralbag is the arch rationalist, and you would imagine to be like the Pashtan Sheba Pashtanim. That's what it says. It says that Shlomo gave it to him. So he said, it can't be that a Jewish king is giving away parts of Eretz Yisrael. So he marshals this verse from Divrei Hayamim Bet, where you see that Hiram is the one who gave to Shlomo these cities.
Rabbi,
why was it that Shlomo? Go ahead, please.
Asher Ereka. How does this jibe with Abraham's message when Hashem says Asher Ereka? How does all this other governments buying and selling and trading and giving with the vision?
Helen, one of the things we learn when we sit down and we learn it in depth is that it's a much more complex landscape. And even Shlomo HaMelech is here interacting with other powers of the region. And there's an interaction. And it's not a negation of, the vision that was given to Avram Avinu. Perhaps it is its very fulfillment. And back to, was it Karen or Shelley? I remember who said it now. This harbinger of the Yemot HaMashiach. It can't be a Beit Tefillah. It can't be a house of prayer for all nations if it's hermetically sealed off and Israel's for the Jews and we don't let tourists in and we don't let the prayerful come in and we don't want anyone to talk to Hashem and it's for us. That's not the mission. The whole point of Israel is Davka, it is a platform for the projection of these things. Larry, you had your hand up, so I'll let it go to you. I see we're starting to run short on time. I just want to see the Malbim still, so go ahead, please.
I don't understand how the Ralbag reconciles what he's saying with the explicit language of Perek Tet, Psukim Yud Yud Bet.
I don't either.
Okay. So
the Ralbag just says, but when you look up the version of this story in Divrei Hayamim Bet, I guess we will go there after all. It's a sticking point, so just to see it. In chapter 8 of Divrei Hayamim Bet, where it describes what's going on in chapter 8, in verse 2, it says, "V'ha'arim asher natan Huram lishlomo, bana Shlomo otam, vayoshev sham b'nei Yisrael." In the version that is in Sefer Divrei Hayamim Bet, no such thing that Shlomo gave anything to Hiram in cities, but rather that Hiram gave it to Shlomo. How does Ralbag bake that back into the explicit words of Melachim Alef, Ani lo yodea. I just don't know.
How did Shlomo compensate Hiram for the forest that he chopped down and sold to him?
It seems that Hiram, if you remember in chapter 5, when he's introduced, Hiram has a love for David and therefore a love for Shlomo, and there's going to be trade in it for him. And he's getting a lot out of it himself, his prestige and his power and his protection by Shlomo, etc., who's the big army on the block. But it does seem to be much more of a one-way street, unless you argue that no, Shlomo gave him in return 20 cities. By the way, I mean,
or mutual defense.
Yeah, or something like that. Right. Rashi, what is the Eretz Kavul? Why do they call it Eretz Kavul? Rashi says there's a place of chains because it was filled with mortar. Your feet would sink into it. Ralbag, same thing, says a place filled with sand. There's no fruit growing there. Mitzudat David, same kind of idea, as if there's chains around it. The Radak, same kind of idea. I just gave you here. After the 20 years of building the Beit Hashem, 7 years the house for God and 13 years his own house. That's 20, right? And Hiram helped him the whole time with the cedars, with the cypresses, with the gold. And in return, says the Radak, he gave him 20 cities in the Galil, but he didn't like it. He called it Eretz Kavul. He didn't like it. Kavul meaning Sagur. It was enclosed. No one passed through it. It was not really a crossroads in the end. It was sort of out of the way. It was not actually on the road, so it didn't give him more trade. And it was a low part of the land. It was not a good part of the land. And Chazal, he describes the words of Chazal here. So I just gave it to you down here. And he also quotes, by the way, Divrei Hayamim, that Hiram gave it to Shlomo, right? Try to explain it, right? And therefore Shlomo also gave him 20. It was like a land exchange. Yes, the Chazek Habrit Beinayim. And it's described here what Shlomo gave to Hiram. And Divrei Hayamim, it tells you what Hiram gave to Shlomo. It was a switch. So the Gemara here says it's Eretz Kavul, just telling you that the Eretz Kavul is a place that's chained up. It's not productive. It doesn't do what it needs to do. And perhaps that was the issue. Alternatively, Rav Huna thinks it's people who were laden. They were enchained with their gold and silver. They had so much of it. Right? If that's true, Rava disagrees, so if that's true, so why wouldn't he like it? Right? So what was the problem? Okay, so the point was that because they were so well endowed financially, the Atirim of Fanki, they were Funakim, they didn't pay any heed to do any work. And so Hiram told them, we're all about industriousness. He gave me all these people to be in charge of. They don't want to do anything because they're so rich. The wealth is getting in the way. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, no, it's the Eretz Chumton Haya. It's an area that was so filled with sand. So it's called Kabul because your legs would sink in and you would be stuck there. And then no, there was nothing there, no fruit, etc. The Malbim asks the following: Torah is not allowed to do that. How could he give away part of the land? And why did he wake up now to give him this gift? And how did he say to him, what are these cities that you gave me? As if he was not happy with the gift that he received, Hiram, right? And in Divrei Hayamim, it says Hiram gave it to Shlomo, and Shlomo built them up. It never says this part here, that Shlomo got cities from Hiram. It says he gave them to Hiram. And why did he give him now 120 talents of gold, right? What is this 120 talents of gold Hiram is sending him? And what is mentioning now? All of this, it tells you all of the story about all of the raising of the tribute, meaning of the people, from all the structures that he built that have nothing to do with the mas. Should have said it elsewhere. Says, he explains, Vanachon kimash katuv Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel sheshlomo lo natan l'chiram ha'arim l'chalutin lo tzemik kedushat haaretz. The Abarbanel says the Malbim, they were separated by 4.5 centuries, the two of them, but the Malbim considers himself a Talmud of the Abarbanel. His Rabbeinu Yitzchak Abarbanel says it was not forever. He wasn't taking it away from kedushat haaretz. What was he doing? He had to give him something across the years over year, some 20,000. This was the trade, 20,000 kur of wheat and 20,000 a core, a volume, not a weight, excuse me, volume of oil. That was the trade. To Larry's point, from what do you get back? That's right there. So he would give it to him the 20 years, over a 20-year period. Why? Because he gave him the cedars. So Shlomo wanted to keep the tap flowing, to keep getting wood, to keep getting what he needed, those supplies, and he would in turn be giving him the cities and the use of those cities. So what did Shlomo do instead? He gave him now 20, that's why it's 20, because it's with the 20 years of building him 20 cities in the land of the Galil, which is an Eretz Mevurachet. It is a blessed place. It is a place that's productive. The Barbanel, not like Chazal. It's a good place. Shasadod of Karmi Azeitim Yeshua Badim L'chiram Lotzi Mikol Ir Elef Kor Chitin the Elef Kor Shaman. That the fields and the vineyards will now belong to Chiram, meaning he'll get to take the produce from those 20. Literally give it over to him politically. He gave it to him as the source where he could take what he wanted and bring it back. And that's why the story of Hiram is being repeated here, even though it was already in chapter 5 and it came up again in chapter 7. Why are you mentioning it him again here? Because the 20 years of building was also the 20 years of 20 cities where he could get what he needed, 1,000 core from each one. But he wanted to keep it going after that. And that's when Hiram said, come on, we're not going to keep doing that. He built everything he needed. On account of the fact that Hiram gave this outlay to Shlomo of the wood, of everything he needed. Therefore, as he told him, here, get the wheat from here, get the oil from there. Right? It's a very rich place. We saw on the map. What's it very close to? Right? Remember, there's a little city. This is Eretz Kabul. This whole area, there are vineyards. This is it's a rich area. It's very fertile. It's a plain, beautiful. You can grow stuff. Didn't work out. He didn't like it. There won't be enough here for me. There's too much sand here. They didn't know about chamamot. They couldn't grow things in sand yet. This is a sandy place. It doesn't have fruit. So Hiram gave the cities back to Shlomo. And that's what it means in Divrei Hayamim, that these are the cities that Hiram gave to Shlomo. Rotzalomar shenatan lo bechazara. Bana Shlomo otam vayoshev sham et bnei Yisrael sheim yavdu admata vayitnu esrim Alef kurim lechiram. You know what this means? It means that when someone who's a non-Jewish king comes to the land of Israel, decides he's going to plant and he's going to grow fruit and crops, it's not going to work. But when you put the Jewish king back in it, he gave Vayidikach Nishar B'nei Kashrut Laba V'az Vayishlach Hiram LaMelech Mea V'Esrim Kikar Zahav. That's why he tells 120 talents of gold. Shagash Lutzach Shlomo Arazim Hosif Lo Tet Lo Zahav Yotem Mimash Natan Lo Tchila. As soon as Shlomo settled that place, now it gave its fruit. It's a beautiful idea. We saw this play out in the 19th century into the 20th century. Yeah, everybody knows the lines from Mark Twain in his special Innocents Abroad, when coming to the land of we called the land of Israel, the biblical land, and would have infested with malaria and terrible. Okay, so by Yamim Ahim Bazman Hazeh, V'zed Dvar Hamas, it's Lomar Azaya Siba Sheba Vuro Hela Shlomo Mas Israel. Right, that's on account of that, right? Because he had to build the house for Hashem. That's why it goes back in verse 15 to tell us this. What's the milo? The lemalot. Makom Yerushalayim be'ir David. V'nikra milo Hashem shemukav choma nemucha umal'o letocha afar. He filled it with dirt. It was a landfill area, right? What we'll see in not chapter, but in Bayit Sheni, that's what Herod is going to do to build the Temple Mount. He's going to build it up. That's what they were doing. They filled up a place called the Milo. Now, where is the Milo today? I'm not an archaeologist. I'm sure archaeologists wrote about it. I didn't do enough research on it yet. but maybe I still have to. If you look up in Shmuel Bet chapter 5, it already describes the Milo is mentioned there. I suspect not anachronistically. They did a landfill, because if you think about how it looks when you go to Yerushalayim today, Mamash today, you know that there's the Har Habayit, Har Moriah, with the wall sort of encasing it. And you know where Ir David is. We've seen it many times on a map. So in between the two, maybe the valley was deeper and he filled it up. It's just not entirely clear. There's the road there now, the road that goes around the old city. So possible, could be. Okay, we're totally out of time. Just to say that the Ramban in the Parsha Shoftim, about when you come close to another nation in the land of Israel, you stretch out your hand for peace first. You give them an offer, right, of peace. And he describes what the Rambam writes, and he says, what he disagrees with, etc. But he says that's what Shlomo did, is that he raised the tribute, and then he went to these people, all the people who were left from the Amori, all these nations. They were not destroyed. They didn't decide to leave, but now they were not able to be. Not that Jewish people were not physically able to, but halachically, so to speak, they were not able to. Right? Why not? Va'inyan hazeh kitorah asa'o ki kablu alem shava mitzvot. Once the nations, these nations from the 7 nations, accepted upon themselves the 7 mitzvot, v'davar baruhu ki kivan shenatnam Shlomo osei melachto gavra yado aleihem v'yachol yalach. He could have killed them. He could have. The Ramban believes if the nations that live in the land of Israel are willing to accept the 7 Noahide laws, then even the mitzvahs of the Torah about destroying them. So you came to them, you gave them an offer. To the Ramban, they accepted. Okay, they lived subjugated. The point of making the point about them being under the thumb of Malchut Yisrael is they didn't have to be killed. So they weren't able to physically. It's that they weren't juridically allowed to anymore because they had taken this on for themselves. Last thing for today. The whole thing with Para Melech Mitzrayim is incredibly significant. And I want you to see it before we get to the problems. And there were problems with this. Mikan ad ve'et beit choron tachton mamar musgar. It's a little section about Paro, the king. B'shura katuv shebanat Megiddo ve'et gezer ve'et beit choron tachton. V'siper eich banat gezer v'yaitam yushevet mina Knaani. It was already a built-up city by the Canaanites. Paro lachdav sarfa ba'esh. Paro had destroyed it, right? He actually gave him Gezer as a gift, but it was part of settling the land because Paro, even though we don't want to understand it this way, was still a player in the ancient Near East by the time of Shlomo. It's another power, it's the power from Mitzrayim. When you see all of this in one picture, the last thing I want you to open is Melachim Alef, chapter 3. Dial back to Melachim Alef, chapter 3. Just look at the first pasuk, and we're done for today. I'm happy to take other questions for those who want to stay, but just look at chapter 3, verse 1, and I want you to see it now in a different light. The point here of what it means that the lowest place on earth, and from a spiritual perspective, Mitzrayim, had a representative that was being brought out, as the Hasidim might have said, that Klal Yisrael was able to be malel and nitzotzot. They raised up the sparks of kedusha, such as they were in Mitzrayim, and wedded them. Pasuk chapter 3, verse 1, the beginning of the whole story, which when we read originally, we said, huh? But now understand a different light. Vayitchaten Shlomo et Paro melech Mitzrayim. Shlomo married Paro, the king of Egypt. And what does that mean that he married him? Vayikach et bat Paro, vayevieha el ir David, ad kaloto livnot et beito ve'et beit Hashem ve'et chomat Yerushalayim saviv. Rakam, then we learned, but the nation this time, mizarchim b'amot ki lo nivneh bayit l'shem Hashem ad yamim ahem. Right? Then we come to verse. We learned the rest of it. We already learned even today. Then it says Shlomo loved Hashem. He followed everything Hashem wanted. He went to Giv'on to also give offerings. There Hashem came to him, asked him what he wanted. There he said, I want wisdom. There he got up and it was a dream. There he came and he stood before the Aron Brit Hashem. In verse 15, chapter 3, verse 15. Then the story of the 2 women to demonstrate the great intellectual prowess and the greatness of Shlomo and the name of Shlomo, etc. Right? That's the end of chapter 3. And then verse 4, the description in chapter 4, rather, of his leaders and how they're spread around all over the place. Chapter 5, his great wealth. And in chapter 5, we learn about his great wisdom, which he applied to what? To building a house for Hashem. Chapter 6 and 7, the building. Chapter 8, the inauguration. Chapter 9, the conditions on that building. And then a retrospective of, now let's understand how the international relations went from north to south, from Hiram down to Eilat, from Tzor to Eilat, what we call Eilat, Etzion Gaver probably is that place, to Mitzrayim, the whole of the map. And Shlomo has consolidated all of this. And the point of Bat Paro being in the mix and being a free feature of chapter 9 is not to highlight, look how terrible, look how silly, it's ridiculous, it makes no sense, we got out of Egypt, what's he doing? It's to say instead, no, the whole of the world, the most sophisticated nation of the world is the Jewish people, and their chachma radiates outward from the top. And now the whole in the world wants to come closer. And we're starting with, we have Tzor and we have Mitzrayim to the north and to the south. And there's connections there. And of course, had all gone according to plan, this would have been Yemot HaMashiach, Min Hastam. Didn't exactly pan out that way. What we'll see next time we get together is the story of Malkat Sheva, the expansion of the spiritual territory of Shlomo HaMelech. I say it in quotation marks because he didn't use swords. He used the charisma and the intellect. And Malkat Sheva, the queen of Sheba, makes this royal visit to him. More on that, God willing, next week. I'll shut the recorder now. If you want to stick around a couple minutes, I have a meeting at 11, so I only have a couple minutes. But okay, Ad Khan for today.